Welcome back, and today we have a sample answer for question 3. Let's begin.
Begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a psychology class.
Some researchers did an experiment related to this. What they did was they assembled a group of subjects, a group of students, and they showed these students a series of geometrical shapes. These were very distinctive shapes, a little unusual, not the kind of shapes the students often see. But they only showed the students the shapes for a very short period of time, about a second. They also lowered the light in the room to make it even more difficult for the students to see the shapes. So the shapes were there for a split second in dim light, and then they were gone. In the next step of the experiment, the researchers again showed the students some shapes, but this time they gave the students a longer time to look at them. And this time they showed the images in pairs, 2 at a time. In each pair, one shape was a shape the students had already seen, for just a split second, in dim light, and the other was some other shape that hadn't been shown to them before. After presenting each pair, the researchers asked the students to say which of the 2 shapes they liked better. Most of the time, the students preferred the shape they'd already seen earlier in the experiment. Now, if you asked them if they'd already seen that shape, they probably wouldn't know for sure. But that didn't matter. They still tended to prefer the shapes they'd already seen.
Explain how the experiment described by the professor illustrates the familiarity principle.
The familiarity principle is when a person has to choose between 2 items that are similar. They pick the one they are familiar with, even if they do not remember ever coming across the familiar item. The professor illustrates this with an experiment in which a group of students is shown a series of distinct shapes for about a second in dim light. So they only see each shape briefly in bad lighting. In the following part of the experiment, the students were shown shapes, but this time for a longer period of time and in pairs. Each pair contained a shape they had seen earlier in bad lighting, and the other shape was the one they hadn't seen. When students were asked which shape they preferred, they would generally pick the one they had seen before in dim light for 1 second, even though they didn't remember seeing it. Why don't we look at my answer using the speaking rubric? First, language use. Notice how I paraphrase the definition of familiarity principle from the reading. I explained the idea using my own words without changing the meaning. I did this by using synonyms like pick instead of choose. And I also changed the word order sometimes. For example, instead of 2 similar items, I said 2 items that are similar. I made good use of adverbs to describe frequency and time like generally and briefly. And I also use comparatives like longer and earlier to show how long or when something happened. For topic development, I laid the groundwork by defining what I would be talking about and used the example in the listening to demonstrate the concept. I described the steps in the experiment in a logical order, easy to follow. Finally, in my delivery, I was easy to understand, my pronunciation was clear, and I had good intonation. If you found this sample answer helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. This allows us to create more free content for you. Please leave a comment below if you have any questions. Check out our next video where we give a sample answer to question 4.